doesn't matter if you're 5 years old or you're 55 years old. You get up every day, you're aging. And so we want to have a conversation about how do we talk about intergenerational issues and how that impacts us on Aging Well Together. Our first Aging Well Together podcast is going to be about our new Grandparents Raising Grandkids Resource Center. We had none other than our Congressman, Jim McGovern. We're going to cover issues around community health workers as a part of the service delivery for the Resource Center. We're going to talk about food insecurity. We are going to talk about issues of mental health and behavioral health issues. And we're also going to talk about issues of respite care, particularly for grandparents that are raising their grandchildren, also known as grandfamilies. So stay tuned, stay connected, and I look forward to getting your feedback on our first Aging Well Together podcast. Today is our first podcast, a part of our new podcast series is called Aging Well Together. And the whole concept of this podcast is to basically shine a light on all of the aging-related issues and challenges, not just facing our older adults here in central Massachusetts, but across the Commonwealth. And today we're very fortunate to have our Congressman, James McGovern, here with us. And we just want to thank the Congressman for joining us today and to talk about his amazing work that he's not only done nationally, but particularly around grandparents that are raising their grandchildren, grandkids, or also known as grandfamilies. And so I want to take a moment to introduce the Congressman, to let him say a few words, and then we'll go into the different segments.
Well, I'm happy to be with you, and thank you for all your work, Moses. And every day I go to work, I think about our older Americans, our seniors. These are the people who have fought in our wars and worked in our factories, and they have raised our families, and we owe them such a debt of gratitude. And so a lot of what I focus on in Congress is how do we make life a little bit easier for this population. And that's why I introduced the bill, to help grandparents raise their grandchildren. And that's why I work on a lot of issues that we work jointly together on.
Yeah, absolutely. And so back at the start of the pandemic, Congressman, we saw an unprecedented amount of outreach to our organization, the Central Mass Agency on Aging, from grandparents that were raising their grandchildren. And you and I had a conversation about a year ago about ways that we could work to collaborate to support this population. And we were very fortunate that you were able to secure a $1.2 million earmark for us to establish a resource center to support these families. And so this month is May, which is Older Americans Month, and we are launching this resource center. So when we talk about a resource center, we're not talking about a brick and mortar space. We're taking a very innovative approach to this resource center model, where we're going to utilize community health workers that will be a part of 15 of the largest senior centers here in Central Mass on sort of a roving schedule at the senior centers, as well as with the public school systems and other community-based organizations that focus on the well-being of older adults and the young people that they're raising. And so I know you've done a lot of work even before this funding was established for this resource center, but particularly on the housing piece, which is a big piece for these grandfamilies who are struggling to not only find accessible housing, but affordable housing. Could you talk a little bit about your work around that?
Yeah, well, a lot of parents are now raising their grandchildren for a variety of reasons. Life is complicated, but grandparents love their grandkids, and they're there to step in if parents can't fulfill that role. But it's not as easy as saying, I'll just take my grandkids. A lot of older people, senior citizens, live in housing that is just available for senior citizens, where if you're not a senior citizen, you can't live there. And so if I'm going to raise my grandchild, I'm going to have to bring them in the same apartment or same home as me. And if I'm in a place that says I can't, then what do? I have to look for other housing. And housing is expensive.
Yeah.
Apartments are expensive. And so with this bill, the Grand Family Housing Act would do is provide some resources to help offset the cost of housing for grandparents raising their grandchildren. We passed it in the House of Representatives, and it was part of the National Defense Authorization Act. Congresswoman Ayanna Presley was my co-sponsor. She's from Massachusetts. She cares about this issue as well. Unfortunately, it was dropped in the Senate, so we're going to reintroduce the bill in this Congress.
Yeah. And that's a very important point. 1 in 10 children are being raised at least by one grandparent in the United States. And oftentimes it's because of issues of substance abuse and drugs with, the son or the daughter of these kids. And so how do we create a more equitable system where we're not just only focusing on obviously the older adult and the grandchild, but how do we make sure we're going to get the parents of these kids the help that they need in situations like that?
So we need a more holistic approach, right? I mean, if a parent needs help, needs to get medical support services or whatever, we ought to make sure that we can help connect those dots. If a grandparent is going to raise their grandchild and they need housing, we ought to connect that dot to make sure that grandparent has access to adequate housing. But it's even beyond that, right? I mean, raising kids today is different than raising kids, 10, 20, 30 years ago. Much more is done online. There are more requirements. There are more, forms that need to be filled out. And so we need to make sure that we're connecting the grandparent, with all the relevant institutions that are part of a child's life, whether it's the school system or their doctor or, whatever it is. We have to connect the dots, and that's why we need a resource center, right? So it's not just one thing. Yeah, the housing part of it is important, but there's a million more things to it. And this issue first came to my attention when grandparents who were raising their grandchildren came to me and were telling me about how difficult it was even to be able to get the teacher to inform them of how their grandchild was doing in school, because they didn't have the authority to get that information. So we have to understand what the reality is, and we have to make sure that the support services are there to help the children, the parent, and the grandparents, because we want that child to grow up in a healthy environment and to have a wonderful, positive, successful life.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's a segue into my next topic is, we've obviously had a lot of outreach about, what this resource center would look like, whom it would serve. And for us, we're going to service, everybody. If you're a grandparent raising grandchildren or a grandchild, the center is going to be there to support you. And I know when we received the funding, we were very intentional to make sure that, there was a cultural aspect to this in terms of making sure that these families that speak a different language, that might not be able to know how to navigate the government systems, would be able to have an access to the services that, they're entitled to, or the services that we would provide. And so that's where those community health workers from these various backgrounds are going to come into place.
Mm-hmm.
And again, we're going to service everybody. But we have seen since COVID that a majority of the families that we've been working with have been from very diverse backgrounds. And not to say that, there's not other backgrounds out there, but we will service everybody. So I just wanted to make that clear. And, this center would focus on things like cultural foods, getting them access to, health and medical care. Dental care is a big issue. And you work with us on the dental clinic that we have at QCC for seniors. But also, the other piece to this as well is to make sure that most of these families don't have the legal custody of their grandchildren. And so we're going to be partnering with Community Legal Aid to create some type of pipeline and come in contact with these families that don't have the legal access to getting the rights and custody of their grandkids. Community Legal Aid is going to work with us to make sure that these families are going to be able to do that, because that's important.
Well, and that's why, we, in consultation with you, we earmarked $1.2 million to CMAA to actually put this resource center together. Look, there are services out there, and if you don't know that they're out there, then you're not going to get any benefits from them. And there's a case to be made for one-stop shopping. These grandparents who are raising their grandchildren, probably both the grandparents, the grandchild, and the parent have probably gone through some really difficult times. People are overwhelmed. They're scared. They're nervous. They're desperate. They don't know what the future holds. So we need to have a welcoming place for people to go and say, here's my story. Now you tell me how you can be of help, and connecting the dots on everything, right? I mean, everything from legal custody, to how you communicate with the school, as you're waiting for that legal custody, how you deal with medical issues, I mean, housing issues, food issues. I mean, we go right down the list. And it is appropriate, as you mentioned, that that whatever the services are culturally appropriate, right? Because we have a diverse community. So if you don't have somebody there who can speak Spanish, well, then your ability to help somebody is limited. When this is up and running, this is going to help a lot of people. We're told that 1 in 10 children are being raised by at least one grandparent in the United States. 1 in 10. So this is not just a handful of people, right? There's a lot of grandparents raising their grandchildren right now.
Yeah. And the other piece to that too, Congressman, is that, outside of the housing issue, which ranked as the #1 issue among these families, for the older adult themselves, respite care is a huge part of this as well. So we've pulled together an advisory group of grandparents as well as community leaders from various organizations to help us come up with what are the things that we're going to focus on immediate with this resource center. And the #1 issue from that meeting was respite care. How do we give these grandparents some relief so that they could go to their own medical appointments, so they could go out and, do the things that they need to do so they can be well for themselves to be able to take care of their grandchildren. And so we're exploring a number of ways of, possibly creating some partnerships with some child care providers on giving them some respite leave where they could leave a grandchild at a program for a few hours during the day or the week so they can go and do the things they need to take care of.
Well, that's incredibly important. And then, again, you're to be commended for looking at this holistically. Oftentimes we look at these problems and these challenges and we look at them through a very small lens. You're looking at it through a bigger lens, looking at everything. And respite care is important because, again, if you're getting older, you're probably going to have more doctor's appointments. I mean, that's just what happens. I'm getting older, I get more doctor's appointments, right? So, and you don't want grandparents to skip doctor's appointments. Because you skip a doctor's appointment and something that can be treated goes unchecked, then all of a sudden it becomes untreatable. So things could spiral out of control. But respite care is, and respite services are important because some of these children are literally children are very, very, very young, and they can't be left alone. And so, this resource center that you're putting together, again, is looking at things holistically, and I think that that's the way we should look at all challenges. And to the extent that we do, this is going to be a remarkable service that's going to help countless grandparents and grandfamilies.
Yeah, and you know, again, there's a lot of resources out there, certainly in Massachusetts, to support grand families. But one of the common things that we hear, Congressman, from these families is that there's just too much red tape into them getting access to these services, and so they get so frustrated with the whole process, they just give up. So how can we, from a government perspective, streamline the process for whatever government or agency in this state or federally that support, you know, kinship or, you know, grand families, to make sure that it's less for them to navigate?
Well, in the short term, it's going to be providing funds to organizations like the one that you are the head of to kind of deal with things kind of on the local level. You know, a lot of federal programs as well as state programs are run through the state, right? We need to expand community eligibility. We need to make it possible for one-stop shopping, if you will, where, you know, if you qualify for, you know, emergency fuel assistance, you automatically get enrolled in SNAP. You automatically get enrolled, so that you don't have to, like, go to 1,000 different places and fill out 1,000 different forms in order to get the services that you're entitled to. You know, so, you know, that's, you know, that's how we have to handle it. The other thing is, the issue of grand families is a relatively new topic in Washington. And again, we've been trying to raise the issue through a number of legislative initiatives, and we're going to continue to do that. But sometimes it takes Washington a little while to catch up to where the rest of the world is, right? So to the extent that you are setting an example and you are creating models at the local level, then it makes it easier for us to say, okay, here's what we need to do all around the country. We're doing it right here in Worcester County. You know, follow this example.
Yeah. Absolutely, and I want to talk about the model that we're putting together a little bit more. So I mentioned early on that we are getting MOUs with 15 of the largest senior centers or councils on aging in our area. We cover 61 cities and towns, and being in the senior centers is critical because we know that a lot of older adults and these families, they go to these senior centers for, whether it be for social engagement or just to go there because they have access to them. And we know transportation is a challenge to a lot of these grand families in Central Mass. And so we want to make sure that we are bringing the services to them. You know, somebody that lives up in Fitchburg, they don't have to drive all the way to Worcester to get service. They can go to the Fitchburg Senior Center and meet with a community health worker or go to the public school system and meet with a community health worker as a part of the resource center. So proximity to getting services is critically important, and I think is really going to make this model work for us, because we know when they have access to services in close proximity, the outcome is far greater for them.
Yeah, that's incredibly important. Again, you know, it doesn't seem like a long drive to go from here to Fitchburg or here to, Leominster or Princeton, but for some, it's a huge commitment, and that's assuming you have a car. Not everybody has a car.
Yeah.
And so having to commute, a long distance means that you don't commute. You're not going to go to the place where, you might be able to get some help. But senior centers, we have lots of senior centers in big cities and in small towns, and they're everywhere, and they're in a lot closer proximity. And by the way, grandparents that find themselves in the situation of raising grandchildren, which they didn't plan on, it's a little bit intimidating. And I think for some, it's like, I don't know you, so I don't know if I want to start telling you my life story, right? But at the senior center, I probably know you, and I probably know all the people that are there, and they're my friends, and I feel comfortable with them, and I feel I can be honest with them.
Yeah.
That's a big deal.
Yeah.
There's making sure there's a comfort level for people so they feel at ease, because oftentimes the things that people are going to discuss are sensitive. Sometimes they're things that you don't want anybody to know
Yeah.
about, um, and um, and so it's important that you create a space that people are familiar with, that people are comfortable with. You staff it with individuals who know the individuals who might come to them. Again, the goal here is we know that this is an issue. As I said, 1 in 10 children are being raised by at least one grandparent in this country. So we know this is an issue. So let's figure out a way to help deal with it. And let's make it easy for grandparents that are doing this.
Yeah.
As easy as it can be.
Yeah, and also with the having, this outreach and resource within the senior centers, that also gives us the ability to connect the older adults to other programs that we are already administering, like Meals on Wheels program, caregiver support, legal services, or other services that we as the area agency on aging, we're in charge of discharging. And so it's a wraparound approach. They're going there for their own basic needs, but at the same time, they're going to get a little extra help if they're raising their grandchildren. I want to follow back up on, the benefits that some of these families qualify for and don't qualify for. So we've heard from a lot of these grand families that are raising multiple grandchildren, and the common theme that they've said, well, we don't qualify for food stamps. We don't make enough money, but yet we don't qualify for food stamps. And I think a lot of that has to do with that they don't have legal custody of the grandchildren. And so, we have, over the last 2 years, we've given out hundreds of thousands of dollars in food assistance, not just to these families, but to seniors in general. And so food is very important. And I know Congressman, you've done a lot of work around that, most recently with the White House conference. So could you talk a little bit about that?
Absolutely. Food is everything, right? We need food to survive, to be able to thrive, and so it's important that people have access to good food. And many grandparents are on really strict fixed incomes, so feeding 1 or 2 or 3 other individuals, breakfast, lunch, and dinner, is something that a lot of people might not be able to afford. So we need to make programs like SNAP work for them. And so we're talking to USDA that administers the SNAP program, how they can be more sensitive to the realities that many grandparents face. But putting SNAP aside, there are other programs that that people may qualify for. And during the summer months, for example, we have summer feeding programs, and that could provide sometimes breakfast and lunch for kids that grandparents are raising, so that those are maybe 2 meals a day, or at least 1 meal a day, that they don't have to, try to figure out a way to afford. There are other programs out there, and again, I would think that most of the senior centers are well aware of all the programs available for senior citizens. But with this new kind of support system that you're going to put together, there'll be a greater knowledge about what might be available for younger kids. We're right now pushing the state to make free breakfast and lunch permanent for all of our kids in public school. Forever. And we're getting close to it. We get them to extend it for a year. We want to do it permanently. That would help as well. So all these things, when you add them all together, are pieces of a puzzle that, when it's completed, can help grandparents raise their grandchildren in a way that they want to.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's an excellent point. I know in Massachusetts, I believe Governor Healy just extended the
We need to make it permanent. You did it for a year. California made it permanent. Maine did. Vermont did. Minnesota just did. And here's the good news: at the federal level, it used to be that the federal government would cover the cost of all the meals at a particular school if 40% of the kids who went there qualified for free or reduced lunch. Then the whole school would be covered. The Secretary of Agriculture has announced they're going to lower that down to 25%, which means even more schools would be covered with federal reimbursement totally. So the cost for the state would be substantially lower. So, we need to make it permanent, because if we just do it from year to year, you may get a governor someday who says, like, well, I don't want to do that anymore. I don't think feeding kids is a good thing, so I'll just take it away. We don't want that. We want to make sure our kids, in every school in this Commonwealth, we want every school in this country has access to good, nutritious meals at least twice a day.
Yeah, absolutely. And that brings my next topic is, a lot of these older adults, particularly the young folks that they're raising, are dealing with a lot of mental and behavioral health issues. And, part of the Resource Center, what we're going to be able to do is that we're going to work with a lot of the mental and behavioral health providers to be able to provide the services. So if we come in contact with an older adult or their grandchild that needs some assistance, we'll be able to get them the assistance that they need.
Look, we are so far behind in this country on mental and behavioral health. It's tragic, and we need to do much, much better. And especially aftermath of COVID. I mean, my sister's a teacher in the Worcester Public School System. I mean, life has become more complicated for young people, right? So we need to have the support services there so that when they need help, there's a place for them to go. And we need enough counselors and healthcare professionals to be able to recognize that if I show up at school one day and I'm not smiling, that's not normal, that we need to have a conversation. Because the suicide rate in this country is unconscionably high, and mental health challenges, behavioral health challenges that go unaddressed could end up derailing a child's ability to kind of progress in school and may end up ruining his or her future. So we can't afford to allow people to fall through the cracks. So we need to do more, and that's not only a state issue; it's a federal issue. We're trying to fight for more resources to get into our school systems, to get into our communities, so that if people need some support, it is there for them. Yeah. But again, we're playing catch up. We are not where we should be by any measure, and it really is tragic.
Yeah, and I think also a part of that too, Congressman, is that COVID obviously did a number on our health profession and medical profession, and there seems to be a gap in terms of the number of people that want to continue in clinical and mental behavioral services, and so that has created a backlog of people being on waiting lists to even get seen.
Right, and if you need help, you need it now. Yeah. I mean, if I'm clinically depressed, if I'm having thoughts that could potentially be dangerous, if I'm just spiraling, in the wrong direction, for you to say to me, okay, we can see you maybe in 6 months, or 4 months. No, I need to be seen now. My child needs to be seen now. My grandchild needs to be seen now. And so what we need to do is we need to entice more and more people to go into this field, and we're playing catch up. But we have to do better, and we have to do better quicker. And by the way, when we talk about mental health support services, in the case of grandfamilies, it's not just for the grandchildren. Sometimes it's for the grandparents who themselves have lived through trauma, who have dealt with a son or daughter, dealing with substance use disorder, who have, many of them have gone through hell, so they need some help as well. So we need the whole family. You know, I mean, the kids, the parents, and the grandparents need support services. And by the way, this is not just some like, oh, wouldn't it be nice if we could do this? This is a necessity,
Yes.
right? And if we don't recognize that, we're going to lose more and more young people to suicide, to drugs. You know, we're going to have more parents kind of fall through the cracks, and more grandparents just not being able to handle the challenge of raising their grandkids. Look, you know, a lot of the people we're talking about, the older people, the grandparents who are raising these grandchildren, I mean, they're at the part of their life which is supposed to be the easy part of their life, right? Where you can relax and enjoy everybody.
Yeah.
And I can see my grandkids, you know, whenever I want to.
Yeah.
But now they have to be the parent to their child who's having a difficult time, and the parents to their grandchildren. And so, to the extent we can, again, provide a circle of protection and support around these individuals, that's what we should do. And that's why, you know, what you guys are doing, I think, is so incredibly important, because it recognizes the importance of all these different support systems. And I also think it's a recognition that, again, this population of grandparents who, again, fought in our wars, worked in our factories, raised our kids, you know what, they deserve dignity and respect. That's part of this as well.
Yeah. And I think, again, that's why those community health workers are important, because they'll be able to identify, you know, some of these challenges, you know, through.
And I have a solution to this. You know what? We spend so much on our military budget that it's obscene. We're building nuclear missiles that if we ever use them, it's the end of the world. We continue to build weapon systems that are obsolete, that the Joint Chiefs of Staff don't want. You know what? How about taking some of that money and putting it toward this? You know, making sure that we have the mental health services for everybody in this country, young, middle-aged, old, whoever needs it is there. So when people say, oh, you don't have the money, that's BS. We have the money to invest gazillions of dollars in weapons of mass destruction, but, you know, all of a sudden we're like, we don't have the resources to help our people. Give me a break,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah, and certainly grand families need that support, and you know, there's not a one-prong approach to this. We've got to hit it from multiple
It's holistic.
levels. You know, and also a lot of these grandparents, they are retired, and some have had to go back to work because of inflation. So not only are they caring for their child and the grandchild, they're also working full-time.
Right.
And so that is why services like that, the respite care is so
Right, because
so
child care
key.
is phenomenally expensive,
Yeah.
right? So if you don't have this respite support services and you have to pay for child care, you know, it's expensive. And especially if you have to do it on a regular basis. Again, you need another job just to pay for that, right? So it's like, you know, so we know what the challenge is. We know what we need to do to, you know, meet that challenge. Let's just do it. And again, the people who we're talking about trying to provide some support to are members of our community, right?
Yes.
These are our neighbors and people, you know, that are active in our community. And again, I keep on going by this figure, you know, 1 in 10 children in this country are being raised by at least one grandparent. That means that, you know, when we walk outside and go, you know, if we're downtown Worcester, you know, we're seeing grandparents. We may not know it, who they are, but there are grandparents all around us who are raising their grandchildren as we speak. This is not just, oh, there's a handful, you know. No, this is a huge number.
Yes, and you know, Congressman, I want to thank you again for taking the time to come and chat with us on our first episode on Aging Well Together about the Resource Center and your support for the Resource Center and grand families. And I just want to award you an award for supporting the work that we've done here in Central Mass with grandparents that are raising their grandchildren. And so I want to present to you an award of our appreciation.
Wow.
So right here, you'll notice this is the logo that was
Yeah.
designed for the Resource Center. And so we want to present this to you as being the legislator of the year
Oh.
for grandparents raising grandkids in Central
Oh, that's
Mass.
beautiful. Thank you. I probably should give this to you back, because the reason why we did this was because you suggested it. So, I mean, I'll take some credit for trying to get the money, but the idea of putting this resource together, it came from you and and the people at CMAA, and I'm really honored by this. But look, we're doing this because we know this is the right thing to do, and we want to help people, and that's what people do who care about their community. So thank you.
And we're doing this because way before this funding came, you've been on the front line to support grand families, and we certainly want to recognize that, and we appreciate all of your hard work.
We're going to continue to do
on
that.
behalf of this. So,
Thank you.
Congressman,
All the
thank you.
best. Thank you.
Please visit our website at www.seniorconnection.org.